Oh, you got it. Friday night, panic
We
time.
got it, and yeah, we're only 11 minutes late. So it's funny we say we're gonna do this at 6, and you and I we've been talking for 20 minutes.
Yeah, right. And I was quickly checking course maps for tomorrow. So,
Yes,
and
yes,
if you are doing Las Vegas, try tomorrow. Double check your maps. If you looked at the maps a week ago, he has adjusted the run course. So
yeah,
the run course is going north now instead of the old way, the south way, I guess. So
yeah.
it's all
Oh,
good.
it is what it is. Actually, yeah, it is what it is. And that's something we've talked about a lot. Is like we're talking about like course recon and checking
Mhm.
the maps
Yeah.
and knowing which way they go and it's hard. Like we've talked about it many times when especially if you're not from here or
Yeah.
you're familiar or this is your first race, you kind of have to rely on
Hmm.
those maps. And um, so yeah, it's something you just got to do. And I always do the same. Like a day before, let's have one last look at the course maps.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
Make sure that they haven't changed because we've been to races and like they didn't even know like someone was going to do construction on
yeah,
a
right.
path.
Hmm.
And so the day before, like they're going up to set up the course, like, oh shoot, like that wasn't planned, and they make an adjustment. And that's part of racing
It
is
is, and
all that.
sometimes whoever's issuing the permit, they all of a sudden have some change that they need to implement for whatever reason, like you said, construction or something. And so it is good to just be familiar with the course going into, the night before, do one
Yeah,
more check on the web page and see what's up there.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's hard because one of the things that we try and do is try and mitigate the pre-race anxiety,
Right.
right? And that's part of the anxiety, especially if you don't know the course.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like for us, if they make changes at the lake, we know every bike path. We
Right.
know every possible way out of the
Right.
lake. If they're
That's
going to
right.
go north, they're going to go south, they're going to go on the gravel, they're going to go. And so for you, just seeing it, you're like, okay, that's good. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not
Yeah.
going to change. It's not going to change anything for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but for somebody that once again is not familiar,
Mm-hmm.
definitely be added stress. I contend that this sprint race tomorrow is the hardest run sprint race in the country.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It
I can't
is. It
I
is.
can't
Yeah.
imagine
Yeah. Yeah.
a harder run course than that because it's net uphill,
Yep.
like almost a mile of uphill running
Mm-hmm.
that you don't get back.
No, that's right. It
And it's not that
is.
it's not steep, and it's steep, and that section is right when you get off the bike, so your legs are kind of jello-y,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got to you have to run a mile. The
Yeah.
first mile is all uphill,
Yeah. And
and I mean that's quite a challenge.
it,
It's interesting. Pumpkin Man is like the hardest bike course I think in
yeah.
the country,
Yeah.
and then this is the hardest run course.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And it is the net gain. I mean, I've done courses with more
Yep.
hills in the run course, but you get some of that back because you're starting and finishing at the same place. This one, the finish is up on top of the transition area, which is
Yep.
all uphill. And so that is a tough run course. You are not going to PR.
You're not going to, if you PR this, you've got a great training cycle.
You had a great taper.
You had a great taper. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So, no, so good luck to everybody racing tomorrow. If you're racing there, racing somewhere else, have fun. I'm going to be out there coaching and spectating tomorrow.
good, good.
Hopefully, I'm going to get a swim in. So the UNLV Triathlon Club, some of the members are going to come out and go for a swim with me.
Awesome.
So we're going to try that, but only if it's not super windy.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I haven't checked today, but the winds
it's
were
something
picking
like,
up as the day went on.
yeah,
So,
maybe 10, 15 miles an hour.
oh, okay,
So
that's better than it was. But yeah,
it's not too bad. I'm saying at the time I'd swim because,
okay.
so that'll be kind of fun. Get into the lake for me. I mean, I've been on the shelf for a while, and
Yeah.
so I'm excited to actually get in the water. So yeah,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
good
Good.
times are ahead. So John, I realized that we actually had a podcast on this topic
Yep,
already.
we did. Mm-hmm.
So that just tells us like how messed up this topic is. And the topic is tapering.
Yeah.
And I decided to do this topic because, now that I'm coaching more athletes, I'm really realizing how different it is in how athlete specific tapering is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and how that it actually it's almost witchcraft. And I think I probably mentioned that before. There, I have an athlete that I'm coaching that we have never been able to figure out the taper.
Yeah.
Either, kind of, went too easy and kind of felt stagnant, went too hard, felt too sore. And then I have other athletes, I can pretty much throw anything at them and they do fine.
Yeah.
And so you found this awesome article. It was a meta-analysis. I think it was a meta-analysis of tapering and in endurance sport. It wasn't necessarily triathlon. It was more runners and swimmers but just endurance sports. And so I was so glad you found that, because the things that I'm trying with these athletes, I think I was kind of right on with what I was. But once again, it's tough.
It is, and you mentioned witchcraft, and in one sense it is, because doing this type of research on a taper is not easy. And there's a lot of limitations when you start doing this type of research, because you can only do you only do so much. If a true research project would be like a randomized controlled trial where you join the study and you don't know what type of taper you would get, and then you implement that taper, but that may not be what you want to do as an athlete. So it's really a very challenging topic. And then the other part, and I really liked how this meta-analysis talked about it, was how do you assess the performance of a taper?
Yeah.
And that is not easy, because a lot of the research, they're not measuring performance during a race. They're measuring a laboratory measure of performance, whether that be a time trial or time to complete a distance, or a very common way is also time to exhaustion, which means you just ride or run until you can no longer ride or run, and they write that time down. And that's not an easy model to actually complete as an athlete, because we're not trained to complete a time. We're trained to do a 5K as fast as we can, or 10K, or what have you. So this type of research is really difficult. In fact, this meta-analysis actually highlighted that. They started with 2,000 papers that they found, and they narrowed it down to, what was it, 14? I didn't write it down.
I think it was 14, yeah.
Yeah, 14 papers that they included. So starting with this big bucket of papers, different criteria applied to eventually yield 14 papers in the meta-analysis.
Yeah. So I guess, John, the first thing we should do, and we probably did this before in our last podcast, is really talk about why. Like, why tapering's a thing, what it is, and why someone would want to do it. So I'll let you kind of, why don't you hit off of that? Like, what is a taper?
Well, the whole idea of a taper is to optimize, I should actually say, maximize your performance on race day. That's the goal. You want to do something to your training program, or you want to adjust the training program some way in order to maximize your performance. I was going to start by saying optimize performance, but it's really not optimized, because optimized means it's neither maximized nor minimized. So you're trying to find a sweet spot in there, but you're trying to have the best performance you can on race day. So tapering is reducing something in order to get to that best performance. But that's the trick, is what is that something? Now, when we design a program, and this is what you do for athletes, is you manipulate frequency, how often you train, intensity, how hard you train, time, how long you train for, and then the other element is mode, especially in triathlon. You swim, bike, or run, or strength train, or whatever it is that you're doing, hiking. And so it's a matter of taking that frequency, intensity, time, and mode, and then doing something to that in order to sharpen your performance. All right, go ahead.
There's another big piece to this. So you're absolutely right. That's what we're going to do. But then there's so many more variables. Like, we have a ton of variables already, but let's add a few more variables. So number one variable is, what distance are you racing?
Yeah, right.
Right. Because the taper for an Ironman is different than a taper for a sprint race. Right? Is what level, sorry, what for the athlete, what's the goal of the race? Is this the main race of the year? Or is this a race that they're just doing for fun, or we call it a training race? That it also plays a role. And then adding another big, deep, complex thing is the athlete's training load going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if somebody, for example, had, I don't know, 8 weeks of really hard training, and we've talked about CTL and ATL and those things
Mm-hmm.
before, so chronic training load, acute training load. If someone's had a huge load going in, they might need a long taper,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where let's say somebody, and this happens with age groupers I'm coaching. Well, 3 weeks ago they were on vacation for a week,
Right.
and 5 weeks ago they were, something happened with their kids and they weren't able to train, and so their CTL is relatively low. They may benefit from like maybe something as short as 5 days or 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so there's so many pieces that go into this. When somebody asks, well, how should I taper? The variables are so great.
Yeah.
And like if you once again go into Google or wherever and say, what's the best taper for this? It can't give you that.
No,
But
I'll echo that, and that was one of the reasons why these authors started with 2,000 plus papers, got to 14, is because they weren't including papers on sprinting, not sprint distance, but sprinting.
yeah,
That's a different type of taper than an endurance taper. But then the other element that you're building on what you said is tapers can be different based upon sport. So swimming taper versus a bike taper versus a run taper. We're a triathlon taper. And so how do you take those papers that deal with running taper and how do you apply that to triathlon, and same thing with cycling and then and swimming as well. It's a very complex topic. And I haven't even mentioned nutrition and figuring out how nutrition works into a taper as well.
yeah. So I think we did a pretty good job of covering that. But I'm going to add the pieces of the taper in triathlon. Actually, let's back that up. Not just the pieces of it. Trying to was going to deal with the mode, right? You mentioned the mode. So someone might want to taper their running more than they taper their swimming, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the running tends to build up more, muscular damage and muscular soreness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even figuring those things out. Or, you've got somebody that, they were a collegiate swimmer and they're used to the load. Like it's not a big deal for them to do whatever, 15,000 a week. That's just normal. They've done their whole life. And so dropping the swim might not be a thing, right? But running is the thing that's more catabolic and they want to drop that, or even the cycling, as far as, system level and neurologic fatigue
Mm-hmm.
built up by hours and hours of cycling. So trying to figure that out, once again, is super, super hard.
Mm-hmm.
And to my knowledge, John, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is not a definitive answer in the triathlon world
Mm-mm.
on how to do this.
No,
There's a lot of anecdotes.
no, that's right. That's right. No, there's no definitive answer. And again, going back to the research, this is one of the limitations of research, is most of the studies doing this work are doing what we call group design, where you take 10 athletes and then you take the average response. And that average response may not actually represent any of the 10 athletes, because some athletes might have a better performance in some situation, some worse, and the average would obviously fall in the middle. And so this is the trick, is taking even the research that's out there and then applying it to the individual. And this is going right to what you started with. I mean, it's the witchcraft, it's the dark arts, it's reading tea leaves for that person. What's the best way to get that person to sharpen their performance, to have the best race day?
And then we'll throw one more thing to make it even more difficult with the research side.
Yeah.
Is this research done on age groupers?
Yeah, right.
Like, I'm trying to figure out a taper for a 50-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't see anything in the research of anyone over like 35.
Yeah, right.
Right. And most of it, once again, is college athletes or
Mm-hmm.
professional athletes that are young.
Mm-hmm.
And so once again, like when you Google, how do I taper? And someone's like, they're citing maybe a research article, you have to look at that. Well, these were, 18 to 22-year-old men cross-country runners in college.
Right.
That is a completely different world than a 50-year-old with the stresses of life and everything else, and the ability for someone that's older to recover is different than somebody that is young.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all know that, right? Like we don't know. You and I both know that as we get older, recovery is harder,
Yeah.
and so that gets built into it. So before we get to the take-home message at the end,
Mm-hmm.
it is individual, but there are some parameters that
Yeah.
kind of we can utilize. And so maybe that's nexus to talk about the parameters. So you mentioned the kind of the levers that we can pull.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think of taper, John, what is, so frequency, duration, intensity, mode, what do you look for when you decide what you're going to do to taper?
I look at my training log and I look, it's a lot of history. It's a lot of, tracking how I do as an individual, which doesn't mean it applies to anyone else.
Right.
And it is a lot of keeping notes. What did I do? How did I have a race? And even then, that's spurious. It's not conclusive because I've done, I did that time where I raced on one day and then realized I didn't do the whole course. But fortunately, they had the race again the next day, and I went and did the same race, the same course the next day, and my performance was just as good as the day before. But who would go out and do an all-out event on one day and then do another all-out event the next day? That's not a taper. So,
Yeah.
in my brain, that actually really sort of fired some things and made me think about things a little bit differently in terms of what you can or can't do prior to a race. But it is a lot for me individually. I have used a lot of my notes and looking at my training. What did I do? How did I feel on race day? And then, you try to tweak that taper as you go along, or what you do prior to the race.
Okay. So then what do you do? Like,
Uh,
what works for you? And if this is just personal, like
yeah,
what works for you as far as those levers we talked about?
yeah.
What have you
So,
decided that, yeah, works for you?
I mean, for a sprint race, which I love sprint race, I always take the 2 days before the event off.
Yeah.
The day before the event, I do a really light training, and then ready for the race. And that short taper for me works out really well. Now I do dial back some of the volume during the week of the race, but a lot of times I'm not shooting for a key race to be a sprint race. I'm using that as sort of building within other races that I'm training for. So I really look for a sprint race as like a 1 week type taper with a reduction in volume. I'm still doing everything else the same in terms of the intensity I train at, but I take that 2 days off before, and then the day before just really light, and that seems to work really well for a sprint.
But it's interesting, and I love the fact that you mentioned that, because the sprint race is never your A race of the year.
Right, right.
Like, let's hypothetically say it was, and you were going to, your goal was to win US nationals for sprint distance,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're going to, like, that's your A race for the year. Would you approach it differently?
I probably would. I probably would go into a 2 week uh, drop off of volume, but keep my intensity, and maybe even add a little bit more intensity going into those last 2 weeks. And again, that's where, relying on some of the research, that's what the research sort of speaks to, is maintain that intensity or increase that intensity, going into within your taper, but drop the volume.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, it's always contextual, right? Like,
Hmm.
um it's all, it really does matter, like what that athlete or your goal is. If, and I agree with you, for an A race for the year, if the training up to that point has went well, right, and you haven't had a lot of interruptions,
Right.
I think a 2 week taper is appropriate.
Hmm.
And in the paper they talked about a couple different ways to taper. I really like the approach of, like, what's it called? What was the word they used?
Yeah, the fast decay, slow decay.
Slow decay.
Yeah.
Um, so, or a progressive taper.
Hmm.
So where the first week of the taper, I dropped to 75% volume,
Yeah.
but once again, keep the intensity the same.
Hmm.
Then the next week we go to 50%.
Right.
50% volume, intensity stays the same. So if I'm going to do, let's say, one hard bike, one hard run, I'd still do them, but I wouldn't do, like, instead of, I don't know, let's say you were going to do I don't know, something crazy, like not crazy, 8 by 1,000 running,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So 8K at race pace, maybe instead I do 5,
Yeah.
right? So I still keep the intensity the same, but I just drop the volume.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in general, the people I've worked with, that works well.
Yeah.
But I've had situations with people that they were really kind of like overtraining,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I've dropped it quicker.
Yeah. Right.
Like I said, you know what, you are just right on that razor's edge. Let's drop you to 50%
Yeah.
and just keep 50% for the 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a quick drop.
Yeah.
Um, and I've had success with both, and I've had failures with both.
Yeah. Right. Right. Highly
So
individual. Yeah.
yeah, the one thing that is an interesting thing, and John, have you ever felt bad during a taper? Because a lot of people
Oh,
report like
yeah.
just feeling bad.
Oh, the problem with the taper is you get all those niggles and you're like, wait, am I getting injured? Am I getting sick?
Mhm.
You just feel different
Yeah.
because you're not doing that same training load, and so your body's reacting, sometimes just repairing itself. And yeah, there's a lot of times that you get stressed out just because you feel different, and you're wondering if that's an injury coming on or getting sick. That at least me. How about you?
No, no, it's true, and I account this to changes in hormonal status,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're not having the same stress hormones in your body,
Right.
and so cortisol, for example, is the main stress hormone. Well, cortisol also is along the same pathway as your natural anti-inflammatory pathways,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you actually stimulate the natural anti-inflammatory pathways. And so now you've taken that away, and you're right, pain levels can go up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then we also have something called endogenous opioids.
Mm.
So your body naturally produces basically things to make you feel less pain,
Yeah, right.
and that actually decreases as well during a taper,
Mm.
because your body is naturally producing those things when you're training all of the time. Then the other side is like the dopamine response. So we know that in the brain, dopamine is a feel good thing, right? And we also know that exercise stimulates that and stimulates the production. And so when you do your training in the morning, you feel good, right? You get on the podcast with me, you feel good,
That's right.
right? We get this dopamine hit. Well, if you're used to that all the time, used to that level, and all of a sudden you take that away, so your brain now is going to not feel
Yeah,
as good.
right.
And so these are real things. And so once again, with the athletes that I talk to, especially going into an A race, we have the conversation. I try and have the conversation before,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hey, just so you know, like these are some of the natural things you're gonna feel,
Mm-hmm.
and don't worry about it. Like you're gonna maybe feel down. You might start to feel like some pains in
Mm.
areas that you haven't felt pains in before. You didn't do any damage to yourself. You just aren't you're masking it as much anymore. And I think if you can accept that, or that that's the reason, it's not as difficult of a thing to deal with. But you're right, like John, I could tell you how many times, like during that last week, I'm like, oh my gosh, my hamstring, my knee, my this, my that. Oh, I just don't feel good. I'm not
Right.
sleeping as good.
Mm-hmm.
And those are natural things that happen with the paper.
Well, and I think that I love that explanation. That's really great. And I think because of that, this is a period of time that you don't want to start something new because you're feeling a little different, and you say, oh, well, maybe I need to increase this, whatever this is. Maybe I need to do more stretching or more rolling, and you're not doing that normally. That's not the time to start introducing new elements that you think you should be doing at that point.
The other one thing I want to throw out there is I do with the athletes I coach. It depends on the athlete, but about 10 days out, they stop strength training.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Like strength training is great. And anyone that wants to do it, great. I have many of my athletes do strength training. But I always tell, like, hey, like no strength training, especially the week of, like,
Yeah, right.
even if it's not an A race,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to gain anything. Remember, the strength training is going to be basically breaking you down, and you're not going to have enough chance to
Mm-hmm.
recover from that.
Yeah.
So skip the week of weight training. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to do any harm. But
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I've kind of always lived by, is that week is not a strength training week.
So how do you approach
Yep.
your tapering for an iron distance or 70.3 versus a sprint?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you do?
Well, once again is for me, this is going to be interesting. Almost every 70.3 is an A race because I only do 2 or 3 a year, right?
Mhm.
I'd like to do 3 a year. That's kind of my goal. And so I spread them out enough that I try and spread them out enough that those are like I can actually have a big block and then taper into it. So for me, honestly, it does depend on what led into this, like how much chronic training load I've accumulated in the 8 weeks before.
Right.
And so some of the analytics software we can use can actually give us that number. I can actually put into my analytics and say, okay, what is my chronic training load for the last 8 weeks, right? And I really want to, and then I can even look at the last 2 weeks because I actually want to have an overload during those last 2 weeks before the taper. And I'm saying I'm going to do a 2-week taper. So we overload the system, and then the taper starts. But the taper has to be based off of those metrics, like the last 8 weeks and the last 2 weeks. So you look at, once again, chronic training load, acute training load, and the balance between those. So let's say everything went great. I had a good 8-week block of training, and I had a good 2-week build. Then I go, once again, 75% is my goal. Okay. And I look at, and I look at
75% of
volume.
Of volume. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And I try and look at things like, number one, I look at run first, because once again, run to me is the thing that's most catabolic. So let's hypothetically say I'm doing 30 miles a week. Right. I'm going to look at, okay, what's 75%? That's like 21, 22 miles. Okay. So that next week I'm going to do, like, that's the first check, is like, okay, make sure the mileage is right. And keep, whatever the program had been, like, try and keep about the same intensity. So maybe, one faster run, 2 slower runs, or 3 slower runs. Then I would look to cycling, and cycling, once again, dropping the volume 75%. And now in that case, I often look at time more than mileage.
Interesting.
Yeah, because biking and mileage is weird. Like, it's a weird way to look at, because if I go and I'm doing like a hilly ride around here, I can ride around for 3 hours and only go like 30 miles.
Yeah, right.
Or I could get out on the highway on my time trial bike, and 30 miles is an hour and a half. And so during the taper, I try and pay attention more to for time on the bike, and once again, dropping 75%. And then honestly, swimming, that 2 weeks out, I keep it the same. Yeah. But my swim volume is relatively low, in comparison to biking and running. So then the next week, basically I do the exact same thing, but I go to 50%.
Okay. 50% of
volume
of the pre. Okay.
Of the pre-taper. So if I was doing 30 miles a week running, I'd maybe drop it to 15.
Okay, got it.
And I get really, like, that last week, figuring it out is tough, right? Because especially if you're traveling. Yeah. Right. So, okay, well, we're flying on Thursday, or we're driving on Thursday. Well, what does that allow me to do on Thursday? Right? Or is the race on a Saturday or a Sunday? Right. So I have a really standard thing for, like, 1 week out, I have this bike workout. Anyone I coach probably knows, like, the Ted Gerard 1 week out bike workout. Okay. It's like an hour and 50 minutes with some mixed in intervals. And then, like, if the 2 days before, it's a run, it's like a 5K run. 1 day before, it's a bike ride with some sprinting in the bike ride. Then the swim, it really depends on availability, right? So once again, if you're traveling to a race, I always want to get in the water of the race if I can, right? So if we go down to California and we're at Oceanside, can I get in the ocean 2 days before? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Right. Tempe, for example, you can't. Like, you're not allowed to get into the water, right? So that changes things too. If if once again, it's so race dependent. Yeah. So anyways, there's a plan, but it's based off of those numbers: 75, 50. Try to keep the intensity the same, just drop the volume. And that's what the research basically says. When I read this, I was like, it actually made me feel really good to read this because I'm like,
Yeah.
that's
Little
basically what
affirmation. Right. Right.
it's basically what I do. I was actually hoping for something different. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm,
oh, okay,
mhm.
let's try that.
Yeah.
Um, but and once again, that works for me. It works for a lot of the athletes I've coached, but it doesn't work for all of them. And
Mhm.
like I said, some are enigmas, and trying to figure that out. John, I want to talk about your situation where you did the two races back to back.
Okay.
Because honestly, I've coached several people that have done U.S. nationals where they did back to back. So they did
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Olympic
Right.
on Saturday and the sprint on Sunday, which I think is crazy that
Mhm.
they have two national championships back to
Yeah.
back.
That's hard.
Um, it's an interesting thing in that you look in the research, and we've talked about delayed onset muscle soreness before,
Mhm. Mhm.
that just because you feel sore doesn't mean you can't perform,
Right.
right? And you can, on sore muscles, produce similar wattage.
Yeah.
You have similar heart rate response.
Mhm.
Oftentimes it's just getting going,
Right.
right? Like maybe that first 2 or 3 miles of the bike might feel
Mhm.
not so good,
Yeah.
but you have the ability, your body has the ability to overcome that soreness and that feeling.
Mhm.
And so that's the other thing is to tell people it's okay if you're feeling a little sore. Right?
Mhm.
Um, I read an article once that was saying that you get your taper right if you're a little sore the day before,
Yeah. Right.
right? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to feel great on Thursday if the race is on
Right.
Saturday,
Right.
right?
That's the balance, is trying to find that of what should you feel like on that, in a good taper. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's I was actually listening to a podcast today with a pretty famous triathlon coach, Joe Filio, and he was talking about he coaches Olympians and
Okay.
the highest level people, and he's like, man, I've messed up more of my athletes tapers than we've probably made, and nothing worse than when someone has a high level race this week and then a low level race the next week,
Yeah.
and they do way better in the second.
Yep.
It's like,
Right. Right.
even though the plan was to taper for the big race,
Mm-hmm.
he's
Yep.
like, it happens all the time,
Yeah. Right.
right? And because the body's response is so multifactorial,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so don't feel bad if you mess up your taper.
Well, it was an eye opener because, it was, if I had planned it, that would have been very different. I would have approached it differently, which probably I would have messed up, that I would not have had that freedom to make this mistake. And in reality, it turned around, and it's just like you said, it's okay. Yeah, you're a little sore, but you're still able to perform, or at least in that case, I was. And I mean, my swim split was almost exactly the same. My run split was almost exactly the same. My bike splits were different because I only did one loop instead of two loops. So
But your bike power, I bet, was very
it
similar.
was it was spot on. I mean, everything was the same. And I went and I said, "Wow, that doesn't make sense?" But at the same time, it is a sprint course, sprint distance. So I think that did open up my eyes in terms of the amount of exercise you can do still within your taper, and not to be afraid to do some exercise as you go along. You don't want to go to zero, like you said. You don't want to be that rested that you don't have that, response to the muscles. Or for me, swimming, I love swimming every day, and if I miss 1, 2, or 3 days, I really feel it. My times don't necessarily change so much, but I feel different when I'm swimming, not as frequently. And so I think there is that sensation of what you feel like, plays a big part in terms of how you feel the taper is going.
So, John, let's talk a little bit about, and this is actually really what I wanted to get to today, was the aging athlete and the taper.
Yeah.
And we have to recognize that as we get older, we can't do the same volume, and we
Mhm.
definitely and we can't do the same intensity. We just can't. Like I would love to be able to do what I could do when I was 20,
All right.
right? And once again, we need to recognize our own body and our own limitations, and understand that, what, I might need I maybe I didn't used to need a taper
Hmm.
as much, but now I need it.
Yeah. Right.
um and I also look at when we look at even like some people that I'm coaching people in their 30s and I'm coaching people in their 50s,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it has to be different,
Yeah.
right? The 30-year-old, they can recover quite a bit quicker.
Right.
And so the intensity even might actually, the research paper says keep the intensity the same.
Yeah. Right.
But with a 50-year-old athlete, I'm actually thinking maybe we actually drop the intensity even,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And just because of the recovery takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we do need to take that into account. And very few, once again, of the things you see on the internet or podcasts or something actually think about like the older athlete in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
triathlon. I mean, what are your thoughts on the aging athlete?
I'm so glad you're talking about this and thinking about it this way. I tell you that the research has shown that pretty consistently that high intensity training it works for any age, and I've seen papers where they focused on that older adult age grouper, but I always cringe when I read that because you and I approach this sport as a lifestyle and something that we're looking for those long-term gains. We're really looking, not this year, we're looking next year. Am I still racing? Am I still training? I'm looking the next year after that. And what I worry about is people see this, oh, high intensity training works. Well, it may have shown an improvement for 6 weeks, but are those people still in the sport 6 months later? Did they have, what's the injury status? What's their, ability to continue the lifestyle down the road? And there's no research on that. And so I always cringe when, a paper comes out and says, oh, older adults can benefit from high intensity training. I don't doubt that at all. But it's trying to build that into a sustainable program that's the bigger challenge.
No, I once again could not agree more. And you're right. The research is really good on those 6-week, 8-week.
Yeah, yeah.
We can
Mhm.
gain strength, we can gain
Right,
mobility, we can do all those things in this
right.
short amount of time.
Mhm.
But is it sustainable?
Right.
And when we look at histologically, you look at like tendon studies
Mhm.
of an aging athlete versus a younger athlete,
Mhm.
and you look at collagen synthesis over
Mhm.
time. So how those tendons respond, it is not the same,
Right.
right? And if you want to be in this long term, you got to take care of those things,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Because it's true. I could take somebody that says, hey, I want to do a triathlon in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I could put them in, I would, by the way, if this was their only goal to do one triathlon and never do another one again,
Mhm.
I'd put them on a high intensity training program for 6
Mhm.
weeks,
Yeah.
right?
And it will work.
And it would work.
Mhm.
But it's funny, actually, when I get to coach somebody, I always have an interview first. And sometimes we decide to work together, sometimes we don't. And actually this happened to me this summer. A lady found me, and so we met for coffee, and her goal was, I want to do one triathlon in like 8 weeks. I did one, I wasn't happy with how I did. I want to do one more in 8 weeks, and then I'm done. I'm never going to do another one.
Right.
And I want you to coach me and to improve me the most that you can in these 7 weeks. And I said, actually, that's not my thing.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
Mhm.
that's not what I'm all about. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not into the short
Mhm.
successes, and maybe I was short-sighted on that, but to me that's not what I like to like.
Mhm.
That's not what I motivates me, and even motivates me to coach people,
Right.
right? When I start coaching somebody, one of the things I look at is like, okay, what's your long-term goal?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
because aerobic development in triathlon we talked about this before, it takes decades,
Yeah.
right? And I want to teach you how to do this long term
Mhm.
and to be long
Mhm.
term successful in this. And I don't believe like a ton of high intensity training is gonna
Right.
get you there.
Mhm.
Um, Once again, you want to do a triathlon in 6 to 8 weeks? Absolutely,
Mhm.
that's what you should do. But
That's not our jam. That's not
that's
what we do. I mean, we really we are very much step and step on this approach, and it's more of a lifestyle and long-term gains. And when you're working with someone, even if they have a short-term goal, you're still working with them in a sense of how do you change their mindset, or how do you get their mindset into this should be your regular lifestyle. And if they're done in 6 weeks and gone, I can see you not taking that person on because it's just that's not the way that you're approaching this.
Well, because I approach the people that I coach as an investment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I'm actually investing a lot into them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I charge money, right? But honestly, it's more the emotional investment
Right.
that is, that goes into this. And I view coaching as even relationship building, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I'll be honest with you, if I meet somebody and let's say I meet somebody and we get to chatting and they're like, oh yeah, I'm moving in 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm moving to somewhere in Europe in 6 weeks. I'm like, I'm not going to invest my emotional capital in somebody that's leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I guess I approach coaching the same way. Okay, so we kind of got off topic, which we
No,
tend to.
okay, I was going to bring it back this way because you and
Okay.
I both look at triathlon as adding value to our lives.
Right.
And so now I'm going to go to the taper time.
Okay, good.
And that can actually be a tough time to be struggling and not doing your normal routine. And all of a sudden, it's, your relationships can be strained during a taper time. But okay, so maybe what direction did you want to go in?
No. I want to continue on the discussion of the aging triathlete and not doing what young people do and what the media and Triathlete magazine says to do. And the one thing that I think is once again really important is to recognize where you're at and the age that you are. And and once again, not to dismiss like older people in triathlon can do wonderful things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But we also have to recognize like I'm not Sam Long.
Mm-hmm, right.
And I know people love his YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And when he's smashing,
Yeah.
smashing a workout 3 days before a race,
Yeah.
well, that's him. That's not you. And I think we get caught up into a lot of triathletes get caught up into the social media of what pro triathletes are doing. Hey, did you see what so and so did and the workout they just did? And I'm like, yeah, they're a professional athlete and they're not you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're 48 years old and you've got all these other commitments in your life and all these other things. And you know what, you don't respond and you don't rebuild as quickly as they do. And when they're 48, they'll be in worse shape than you are probably. Right. And recognize that and be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And don't always be looking for what's the next best thing. Like once again, we started off saying that the taper is kind of witchcraft, but if you follow some basic principles and you go at it with a confident mindset, yeah, you might not hit it perfectly every time, but you'll be close.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's kind of where I wanted to go with that is.
Well, and I think I love the topic because we're both in that older age group now. But I think the other part of the mindset of the older athlete and tapering is not putting yourself against your younger self.
Oh yes.
Because when we raced in our 20s, we could do a lot of different things and probably a lot of wiggle room in terms of being able to make a mistake. But I think as we get older, that sort of range of making mistakes sort of gets a little tighter, and we just really need to be careful. And it does, I think, take a little bit more attention to detail as we get older.
So the other little thing that, and this is a saying, I don't even remember where I got it from or heard from, in your taper or even in your training, it's better to be like 10% below than 1% above. Right. Because the 1% above usually means you get injured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So I'd rather go into a race like 10% under.
Mm-hmm.
So I tapered a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Then didn't taper enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that lesson a long time ago personally, where once again I was young and impressionable. It's like 10 years ago now. It's not that long ago, but and I was following a plan for an Olympic distance race.
Yeah.
And it was actually the US Nationals. And I was following this plan that because I honestly didn't know. I think it was my first US Nationals. I really wanted to do well. And I went in so overtrained and I followed their taper,
Yeah.
like to like the T, and I can still remember doing a really, really hard run session and a really, really hard bike session. I think it was like 3 days out and 4 days out. And I got to that race and I was just so fatigued still.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, that's the first time I really recognized. I'm like, this was built for a pro triathlete in
Mm-hmm.
their
Mm-hmm.
20s, and I'm 42
Yeah.
or 41 or something like that. And I'm like, that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, up until then, I did everything in the program,
Right.
right? And I was able to do everything, but when it came time to taper, I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do that, and that's when I first recognized that as we age, we have to be a little bit, like you said, like I'm not even smarter, but there's less wiggle room.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think that that's a really good thing that you said.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing as we get older, that on the intensity part, I always say, I train at the intensity I can today so I can train again tomorrow. And that's not always easy to do because you're comparing yourself to younger you or
Yeah,
someone else posted on Strava and you're like, oh no, I got to go faster than that. And you've really got to, you do need to dial in and I think really be in tune with you and where you are. And again, I think it does get just tighter in terms of that attention as you get older. When you're in the 20s and 30s, you can do lots of different things. I mean, at the high level, obviously you're still, you got to tighten it up. But as a young athlete, you have a little bit more invincibility powers at that point.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like I said, and when in doubt,
Yeah,
give her a little extra,
yeah,
right?
hmm
So I said 75-50. There's nothing wrong with going 60-40
yeah, right, right.
or even 60-30. I mean, I've went into races before, just life got in the way and I couldn't really train the week
Yeah,
of the race. Just too much was happening and I was
yeah,
trying to fit things in. I wasn't, it was barely time to sleep.
hmm
And maybe I got 2 sessions in and I had a great race,
hmm
right? I'm like, okay, like, is that better for me to literally do 2 training sessions in a whole week?
right, right,
Right.
right.
And I don't know, like even you've had this happen too, or maybe you got a cold the week before.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh man, I can't train. And then you
hmm
feel better on race day and you go smash it. And it's
Yeah,
like, well, that doesn't
right.
make any sense. I've been sick all week.
I know.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, once again, I think as we age, we need to be even more aggressive in the taper as far as taking
Mhm.
time, dropping the load.
No, and this is why, keeping a good log, keeping track of things is so important to be able to look back. But you can't even look at one event and say, oh, that was the event, and now I got to replicate that. I think of Paula Newby Frazier. She was asked one time what was the best pre-race diet that she followed, or the pre-race meal the night before race. And she goes, well, I just won Hawaii Ironman. I had pizza the night before, so I guess it's pizza. And she was being, she was kiddingly saying that because she was, obviously saying, you've got to figure it out for yourself. And even for her, that worked for her on that race. That doesn't mean it's going to work every time. So,
No, and like you said, even keeping track of your training log.
hmm
And it's one thing to once again, look at the 2 week taper you did that worked,
yeah,
but does that take into account the 8 weeks?
right, right, right,
Right. And a
right.
lot of people don't look back at the eight
Yeah.
weeks
hmm
or even the 12 weeks before,
hmm
right? Especially
hmm
if you go into, for example, Oceanside, the first kind of bigger race of the year, you may have had a 12-week training block,
hmm
right? That was concentrated, you didn't race.
Yeah.
So then you get a nice taper, you go into
mhm,
that, and then let's say a month later you wanted to do St. George.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I'm gonna do the same taper. Well, no, you're not, because week one after Oceanside is gonna be recovering.
Yeah.
Right now, you got 3 weeks to go
hmm
till St. George.
hmm
So you're gonna train hard for 1 week and then do the exact same taper. Well, it's a different situation going into it,
hmm
right? And this is where, like, once again, maybe working with a coach or working with somebody that's done a back-to-back race in 4 weeks and was successful with it, because once again, those are apples and oranges. Those two
Yeah.
situations are completely different. And if you try and replicate the exact same thing, there were different situations leading into it.
hmm
And
No,
that's,
totally. And but I liked what you said earlier on when we started this was, to have a good taper, you needed to peak out
yeah,
and then sort of start the taper, but if you don't have that same peak, that same, high workload, and even the meta-analysis that we read, they spoke to that, is that one of the markers of success of a taper is what you did before the taper.
Yeah. 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 If you're at a 50% load for the last 8 weeks,
Yeah.
going into your A race, you actually don't need to taper.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
just keep going with that 50% load.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I know people that do this. They're just, once again, that's their jam, and
Yeah.
this is the level they're an 8 hour week triathlete, which is completely fine. I love those people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't need a 2 week taper.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're gonna go 6 hours, 4 hours.
Right.
No, they just keep it going. Maybe like you did for your sprint race. Maybe a couple days before you take a day off.
Yeah.
Maybe throw an extra day off in there.
Mm-hmm.
Drop the intensity a little bit the week before, or the frequency or the volume just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the 75-50 rule is if you've overloaded
Yeah.
in before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, this is a question that I've had asked before for people. It's like, oh well, what should my taper look like? And I look at their log, and it's like, okay, well you're only averaging 6 to 8 weeks of 6 to 8 hours a week. That's like an hour a day.
Yeah. Right.
I don't think we really need to decrease your load.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be doing a 70.3 race,
Mm-hmm.
the load is not the issue here.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and for this event tomorrow, which I'll do the long course, because I was going to do the short course and then go for an extra ride afterwards. So I said, oh, I might as well just sign up for the long course at that point, because this is I'm targeting another race down the road.
Right.
And I took today easy, but the rest of my training was this week was pretty much the same, because this is really just part of that build for a race,
Right.
as opposed to trying to taper. And I don't need a lot of intensity right now, and just trying to maintain that volume. And so it goes back to situational awareness in terms of what an event is for you and what you're targeting to accomplish at that.
Well, John, I can tell you one thing. I was sad when I found out you're doing the long course.
Oh, well, you don't need to stay around.
No, because then we can't hang out.
I know.
You start early and finish late.
I know. Right?
Yeah, I'm getting there at 6. You're going to be heading to the water about that time, right? And then I got to be honest with you. I don't know how long I'm going to hang around after.
Yeah, don't hang around.
Some of the Olympic finishers finish, but like, yeah, you're like that. That's antisocial, John. If I wanted to socialize with you, I should have went to Cocopelli when you did the sprint race.
I don't know how many people are doing the long course, but it's probably not a lot.
It's probably
And,
not.
I'm not expecting anyone to hang around, and I'm going to try to finish and then get to the football game and
Yeah.
watch that. So let's see if we can do. Oh, let's see if they do have the long course in the results here. See if they've got people. There looks to be about 12 women and maybe about, I'm just looking quickly, maybe about 20 men. So
Yeah. Well, just go fast and then you'll see me.
yeah. Oh, it'll be fun. It'll be good to be out. I always like seeing people, and I know we both enjoy that part, and so that's really good. So yeah, it'll be fun. Well, this is fun talking about tapering, and it is hard, but let's give some take home points for the tapering. Like, what is your walk away message for tapering if someone listened to this?
My take home is, when in doubt, taper more.
All right, I like that.
Yeah, that's like in a nutshell. When in doubt, a little extra is probably better than not enough.
All right. I'm going to reflect what the meta-analysis really supported, which was drop the volume, keep your frequency and intensity the same.
Yeah.
But drop the volume.
Yep. Yep. And that's exactly that's what it said. I still think that you should probably drop the intensity a little too.
Yeah.
It depends on you too, though, right? Like if you're doing 3 or 4 intense sessions a week.
Yeah.
Or like you, I know you don't do a ton of intensity.
Yeah.
Right, in your training.
Right.
So I think it does depend. So.
No, you're right. It is distance dependent, and sprint would be different than a long duration. One other thing that the meta-analysis talked about was length of time of the taper, and I didn't put it in my notes, but it helped me remember it was between 10 and 14 days, I think is what
There
they,
were some that were saying like even 3 weeks, but really, 8 to
8 to
14 day
14
window. They
days.
called it the Goldilocks
Yeah.
zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, 1 to 2 weeks, but I think a lot of us start like for a big race, we may start that third week out
Yeah.
and starting to adjust training at that point. So, but they're saying most of it 8 to 14. So, you got to figure out what works.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right, John. Hey, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure you haven't packed anything yet, and you probably haven't charged your bike or anything yet.
I charged my bike this time.
Okay,
So
good,
that's
good, good.
charged. I think I'm all ready, but yeah, like I said, before when we started, I all of a sudden didn't know the course, and so I'm going to quickly review that and know what questions I need to ask when I get down there tomorrow morning.
Awesome. All right, well, cool. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
All right, sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye, John.